The early 1930s were a grim time in America. The nation was caught in the grip of the Great Depression. Banks failed, taking people's savings with them. Factories shut their doors, millions lost their jobs. Men who once provided for their families now stood in breadlines. They searched for any work they could find. Often there was none. This economic collapse created a widespread feeling of hopelessness. Across the southern plains, another disaster unfolded. A terrible drought struck the land. The soil, once fertile, turned to dust. Great black blizzards of dust swept across Texas, Oklahoma, and neighboring states. These storms choked the air and buried homes. Farmers watched their crops wither and die. Livestock perished from lack of food and water. Many families had no choice but to abandon their farms. They packed their meager belongings and headed west, seeking a new start that rarely materialized. This era of hardship shaped the people who lived through it. Desperation became a common companion. For some, like Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, the desperation of the times would steer them down a very different and much darker path. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born in Rowena, Texas in 1910. She was a small girl, barely 5 feet tall, but she had a big personality and a sharp mind. Early on, Bonnie showed a talent for writing. She loved poetry and creative expression. She dreamed of a life beyond the small towns of Texas. Her teachers saw her potential. They noted her intelligence and her artistic inclinations. She was a bright student, often winning spelling bees and writing contests. Her early life was not without its challenges. Bonnie's father, a bricklayer, died when she was only 4 years old. Her mother, Emma Parker, moved the family to Cement City, an industrial suburb of Dallas. Life there was hard. Emma worked as a seamstress to support Bonnie and her 2 siblings. Bonnie saw the struggles her mother faced. She understood the value of hard work, yet she still held on to her dreams of something more. At just 15, Bonnie made a decision that would change her life. She dropped out of high school. She married Roy Thornton in 1926. The marriage was troubled from the start. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born near Tellico, Texas in 1909. He was one of many children in a poor farming family. His parents, Henry and Cumie Barrow, struggled to make ends meet. They moved frequently, always searching for better opportunities that never seemed to arrive. Life for the Barrow children was tough. They knew poverty from a young age. Clyde grew up fast, learning to fend for himself in a harsh world. He was small and wiry, but he possessed a restless energy. The Barrow family eventually settled in West Dallas. This was a rough, impoverished area, often called the Devil's Back Porch. It was a place where lawlessness was common. Clyde and his older brother, Marvin Ivan Buck Barrow, were drawn into petty crime. They started with stealing chickens, then they moved on to stealing cars. For Clyde, it was a way to get things he couldn't otherwise afford. It was also a way to gain a sense of power and excitement. Clyde's early encounters with the law were frequent. He was arrested for theft, for carjacking, for various minor offenses. He developed a deep hatred for police officers and the legal system. He saw them as oppressors. In January 1930, Clyde Barrow met Bonnie Parker. The meeting took place at the home of a mutual friend in West Dallas. Clyde was 20 years old, Bonnie was 19. She was visiting a friend who had broken her arm. Clyde walked into the kitchen while Bonnie was making hot chocolate. There was an immediate attraction between them. Bonnie was captivated by Clyde's confidence and his roguish charm. Clyde was drawn to Bonnie's beauty and her spirited personality. They talked for hours that first night. Bonnie was by all accounts smitten. Clyde was unlike anyone she had ever known. He was handsome, daring, and he paid attention to her. He told her about his troubles with the law, but this didn't seem to deter her. Perhaps she saw him as a way out of her mundane life as a waitress. Maybe she saw a kindred spirit, someone else who felt like an outsider. For Bonnie, who loved adventure stories and movies, Clyde might have seemed like a character straight out of fiction. Clyde, too, was taken with Bonnie. He found her loyalty appealing. She seemed to understand him, or at least she was willing to listen. Bonnie offered him a sense of acceptance. Their connection was powerful and immediate. Soon after meeting Bonnie, Clyde found himself in trouble once more. This time, it was for a string of burglaries, and he was sent back to prison. Bonnie was utterly devastated. She visited him regularly, and even smuggled a gun into the jail to help him escape. The attempt was successful, but Clyde was quickly recaptured. This act showed Bonnie's fierce loyalty and her willingness to break the law for Clyde. Clyde's subsequent time in Eastham Prison Farm was even harder. It was during this time that he endured the worst abuses and committed his first killing. When he was finally paroled in February 1932, he was a different man. He was bitter and vengeful, vowing never to return to prison. Bonnie was waiting for him, and their reunion solidified their bond. Their initial crimes together were relatively small-scale. They robbed grocery stores and gas stations, often yielding very little money. They were driven by desperation, needing money for food, for gas, for a place to sleep. Clyde was the leader, while Bonnie was his devoted companion. The stakes were getting higher, and their crimes were escalating. As their crimes became more serious, Clyde realized he needed more help. He began to recruit others to join him and Bonnie, marking the beginning of the Barrow Gang. The composition of the gang changed over time, with members coming and going. Some were friends from Clyde's past, while others were relatives. One of the most notable early members was Raymond Hamilton, a young hardened criminal who had known Clyde for years. Hamilton participated in several robberies with Clyde and Bonnie. Clyde's older brother, Buck Barrow, also joined the gang after his recent release from prison. Buck's wife, Blanche Caldwell Barrow, reluctantly came along. Blanche was a very different personality from Bonnie. She was religious and did not approve of their criminal lifestyle. She joined primarily because she didn't want to be separated from Buck. Her presence added another layer of tension and complexity to the group dynamics. The gang's activities escalated as they began to rob banks, which were more lucrative targets. They were still not master criminals, and their robberies were often poorly planned and chaotic. They made mistakes, but they were daring and willing to use violence. Clyde was a good shot and a skilled driver, abilities that helped them escape from numerous close calls. Life in the Barrow Gang was anything but glamorous. The period from 1932 to 1934 was marked by intense activity for the Barrow Gang. They crisscrossed the central United States, committing robberies and eluding capture. Their territory stretched from Texas and Oklahoma to Missouri, Louisiana, and beyond. They favored Ford 58s for their speed and reliability. Clyde was an expert at stealing these cars and driving them at high speeds during getaways. He knew the back roads well, and this knowledge often gave them an edge over pursuing lawmen. Several incidents during this time became infamous. In Joplin, Missouri, in April 1933, police raided an apartment where the gang was hiding. A fierce shootout erupted and 2 officers were killed. The gang managed to escape, but they left behind many of their possessions, including a camera with undeveloped film. The photographs found on this film, showing Bonnie and Clyde posing with guns, would soon be published in newspapers across the country. These images played a significant role in shaping their public image. Another violent encounter occurred in Platte City, Missouri, in July 1933. The gang was surrounded in a tourist cabin, and again, they shot their way out. Buck Barrow was severely wounded in the head during this fight, and Blanche was also injured. Just days later, the gang was ambushed again near Dexter, Iowa. Buck, too weak to flee, was captured and died from his wounds shortly thereafter. The newspapers of the 1930s played a crucial role in creating the legend of Bonnie and Clyde. In an era before television, newspapers were the primary source of news and entertainment. The exploits of the Barrow Gang provided sensational stories that sold papers. Reporters often exaggerated or romanticized their deeds. Bonnie and Clyde became household names. They were portrayed as daring rebels, defying authority in a time when many people felt powerless. The photographs found at the Joplin hideout were a media sensation. One iconic image showed Bonnie, cigar in mouth, foot on the bumper of a Ford holding a pistol. Another showed her playfully aiming a shotgun at Clyde. These photos presented a glamorous, almost movie star image of the outlaws. They looked confident and defiant. In reality, Bonnie rarely smoked cigars. The photos were staged, a bit of fun for the camera. Bonnie herself contributed to their legend. She wrote poems, the most famous being The Story of Suicide Sal and The Trail's End. These poems portrayed Bonnie and Clyde as tragic figures, aware of their inevitable doom, but determined to live life on their own terms. Her words added a touch of romance and fatalism to their story. Public perception of Bonnie and Clyde was complex and often contradictory. To law enforcement and the families of their victims, they were cold-blooded murderers. They were a menace to society who needed to be stopped. The gang was responsible for the deaths of at least 9 police officers and several civilians. For those who had suffered directly from their crimes, there was no romance, only pain and loss. These communities lived in fear when the Barrow Gang was known to be in the area. However, a significant portion of the public held a more ambiguous view. In the midst of the Great Depression, many people distrusted banks and authority figures. Some saw Bonnie and Clyde as rebels fighting against a corrupt system. They were viewed as modern-day Robin Hoods, though there is little evidence they ever shared their loot with the poor. Their daring escapes and their ability to elude the police for so long also generated a kind of grudging admiration. They seemed to be thumbing their noses at the powerful. By early 1934, the authorities were more determined than ever to stop Bonnie and Clyde. A special team of lawmen was assembled, led by legendary Texas Ranger Frank Hamer. Hamer was a tough, experienced officer known for his relentless pursuit of outlaws. He studied Bonnie and Clyde's movements, their habits, and their connections. He learned that they frequently visited the family of gang member Henry Methvin in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. This information would prove crucial. Hamer and his posse set a trap. They knew the Barrows would likely use a particular rural road near Gibbsland, Louisiana to reach the Methvin farm. On the morning of May 23, 1934, the officers concealed themselves in the bushes along this road. They waited patiently. Ivy Methvin, Henry's father, had been persuaded to cooperate with the lawmen. He was stationed with his truck on the roadside, pretending it had broken down. The plan was for him to flag down Bonnie and Clyde when they appeared. Around 9:15 a.m., Clyde's stolen Ford V8 approached. Clyde slowed the car when he saw Ivy Methvin. This was the moment the officers had been waiting for. Before Clyde or Bonnie could react, the lawmen opened fire. They unleashed a torrent of bullets into the car. Clyde was killed instantly. The deaths of Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow did not end their story. In fact, their legend grew even larger in the years that followed. They became iconic figures in American popular culture. Their tale of love, crime, and rebellion has been retold countless times in books, songs, and movies. The 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde, starring Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, was a major cultural event. It portrayed them as glamorous anti-heroes, further cementing their mythical status for a new generation. What is it about Bonnie and Clyde that continues to fascinate us? Part of it is the romance. Their devotion to each other, their willingness to die together has a tragic appeal. Part of it is their youth and their defiance of authority. They represented a form of rebellion against a system that many felt was unjust. In a way, they embodied a dark version of the American dream, the pursuit of freedom and fame, albeit through illegal and violent means. Their story is a cautionary tale, but also a compelling human drama. Their legacy is also tied to the era in which they lived. The Great Depression created a unique set of circumstances that shaped their lives and their crimes. They were in some ways a product of that desperate time. Their story reflects the social anxieties and the economic hardships of the 1930s. They became symbols, for better or worse, of a particular moment in American history. Their names are instantly recognizable, synonymous with outlaw couples and life on the run. Today, nearly a century after their deaths, Bonnie and Clyde remain subjects of intense interest. They were not heroes. They were killers and thieves. But their story is more than just a list of crimes.